I remember the stretch of road near Pine Ridge like it's etched into my mind, though I wish I could forget it. We were driving that late afternoon, the kind of late October evening where the sun sinks too fast behind the Appalachians, and the shadows stretch long over the narrow, winding lanes. The forest pressed close on either side of the road, thick pines and skeletal oaks casting a lattice of darkness across the asphalt. My friends, Casey and Drew, were joking about old campfire stories, laughing too loudly to mask the unease that comes when you know you're far from anything resembling help. I kept my eyes on the road, headlights piercing the gathering gloom, though there was a tension in the back of my neck that wouldn't ease. That's when I saw it, something or someone, standing at the edge of the pavement. At first, I told myself it was just a hiker, maybe lost and waving for help. But the way the figure didn't shift, didn't step forward, made my stomach twist. Its posture was too stiff, too deliberate, like it wasn't subject to the normal laws of movement. I slowed the van, heart thumping against my ribs, and squinted through the fog that was beginning to roll in from the ridge above. Its eyes, or the semblance of eyes, were locked on mine, unblinking and unyielding, reflecting the headlights with a hollow intensity. I tried to signal it, rolled down the window to call out, but no words came. My voice stuck in my throat. Drew nudged me, his own fear palpable, and whispered, "Do you see that?" I nodded, unable to tear my gaze away. We tried to pass, but the engine sputtered as if the van itself was protesting, coughing and jerking against the incline. I shifted gears, cursed under my breath, and kept inching forward, all the while feeling that unbearable weight of being watched. Then, without warning, the figure was gone. I blinked, my heart leaping into my throat, scanning the fog that now blanketed the side of the road. There was nothing. No footprints, no disturbance in the leaves. Just a silence that felt alive, thick and waiting. Casey muttered something about shadows playing tricks, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. I knew what I had seen, or thought I had seen. But Pine Ridge has a way of bending reality just enough to make you doubt yourself. The rest of the drive was tense. Every curve in the road hid some unseen presence. Every sway of fog felt like it might be hiding eyes. The mountains themselves seemed to lean closer, trees bending like they were listening, waiting. We didn't speak much after that, the kind of silence that presses down on you and makes the hair on your arms stand at attention. When a deer darted across the road, we jumped, screaming more from the shock of our own nerves than the animal itself. By the time we finally reached the next town, the sun had nearly set, staining the horizon in bruised purples and iron reds, and the relief of leaving Pine Ridge behind didn't fully settle. That night, back in the dim light of our rented cabin, I found myself staring at the ceiling, replaying the stretch of road over and over in my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those eyes, fixing me, unblinking, patient. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a local playing a prank, or a lost hiker who melted into the fog. But the stillness of it, the absolute certainty of its gaze, lingered. There was nothing human in how it watched, nothing that could be explained by ordinary fear or imagination. Pine Ridge doesn't forgive curiosity, and I realized too late that some roads take things from you. Moments of your life, perhaps, or a sense of safety you never recover. The following day, I drove the route again with daylight, hoping the sun would reveal the trick of shadows, the illusion of a figure in the mist. But the road was empty, the fog nowhere in sight, and yet the feeling of being watched never quite left. I could swear, even hours later, that every ridge, every hollow, carried an echo of those eyes. I tried to tell my friends, but they laughed it off, attributing it to nerves and the eerie atmosphere of the mountains. I wanted to believe them, I really did, but deep down, I knew Pine Ridge had marked me in a way I couldn't explain or undo. Driving home, I found myself gripping the wheel tighter than necessary, scanning every roadside shadow, every curve. The mountains loomed, dark and indifferent, and the road seemed to twist more sharply than memory dictated. At a stoplight in a small town far from the ridge, I caught myself looking in the rearview mirror for the figure I'd left behind, my pulse spiking when nothing appeared. For days, even back in the comfort of my own home, I felt the lingering chill of that fog, a quiet dread that settled into my chest with every memory of that night. It's strange, the way fear embeds itself in memory. I don't dream of Pine Ridge with screams or running, like in the movies. I dream of silence. the oppressive, waiting silence that drapes over those winding roads. And I wake with my heart pounding, with a vague sense that something is just beyond the edge of vision, always there, patient, watching. Not every road trip ends in laughter or stories shared around a fire. Some end in memories that press against your mind like the cold Appalachian fog, lingering long after the mountains have vanished from sight, reminding you that the world is larger, older, and quieter than you imagined, and that some places keep their secrets well. Even now, I avoid that stretch of road. I drive further out of my way, longer hours, just to skirt the edges of Pine Ridge. But no matter how far I go, the memory comes back. In the hush between the wind and the trees, I hear it, the echo of those eyes unblinking, waiting. And I know that the road is still there, winding silently through the ridges, patient, holding whatever it claimed that night, and perhaps waiting for the next traveler foolish enough to look. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to fall for a dare, but that night, the thought of driving through Devil's Hollow seemed thrilling. It was late October, and the air already carried that sharp, biting chill that makes your skin tighten and your lungs ache a little with each breath. We were 3 friends packed into an old van, headlights cutting thin slices through the early dusk, windows rolled down just enough to feel the night pressing in. Locals had always warned about the hollow, whispers of people who'd gone in and never come out, stories of roads that looped back on themselves, of lights that appeared in the trees, but we laughed it off. Or at least, I pretended to. Deep down, I felt that familiar Appalachian tension, that subtle hum in your chest that tells you the mountains are holding their breath, waiting. As we turned off the main road, the fog hit us like a wall. One moment the van's headlights had shown a clear path, the next, thick white smoke rolled in from the ridges, swallowing the beams entirely. Every mile became an eternity. The familiar shapes of the forest disappeared, replaced by vague, shifting shadows. I kept my eyes glued to the road, heart hammering, but the fog seemed almost sentient, curling around the tires, pressing against the windows. Then I saw the first shadow along the tree line. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a branch bending with the wind, but then it moved in a way that made my stomach drop. It slithered or leaned in angles no human or animal I'd ever seen could manage. My pulse spiked, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. A whisper brushed past the van, barely audible, like wind through dead leaves. I told myself it was the tires or the trees, but then came the laughter. Faint, hollow, and wrong. It wasn't my friends. It wasn't me. It carried a chill that dug into my chest, gnawing at the edge of reason. Casey and Drew were talking nervously in low tones. Their voices rattled despite trying to sound casual, but I couldn't take my eyes off the shadows. They seemed to twist closer with every bend in the road, flickering at the edges of the headlights. My mind tried to reason. Maybe a deer, maybe a projection of nerves, but every instinct screamed that something in the hollow was aware of us, watching, waiting. We tried to keep moving, but the road itself felt wrong. Curves that should have taken seconds stretched on endlessly. Trees pressed in on both sides, branches scraping the roof, shadows sliding across the windshield in ways that didn't make sense. I caught glimpses of shapes crouched along the roadside, figures hunched too low or stretching too tall. I blinked and they were gone, leaving only fog and that unbearable silence that hums with expectation. The van's engine roared a little too loud in my ears, but even that couldn't cover the whispering of the hollow. My throat went dry. Every instinct screamed for us to turn back, but every exit sign was swallowed by fog. At one point, I thought I saw something in the middle of the road, a figure standing with arms stretched unnaturally, head tilted, watching us. My stomach dropped, hands tight on the wheel. I slammed the brakes, but there was nothing when the van stopped. Just fog curling across the asphalt like smoke. My friends were frozen, faces pale, whispering prayers I didn't hear. I forced the engine back to life, driving slowly, each mile heavier than the last. The shadows seemed to mimic us, sliding along the edges of the fog, bending around the trees, appearing behind us when I dared a glance in the rearview mirror. Time lost meaning. I don't know how long we were in that hollow. It could have been 10 minutes or an hour. Every turn, every dip in the road seemed to stretch, and the fog thickened as if we were wading through it rather than driving. Our nerves were frayed, tension coiled tight enough to snap, But no matter how fast I pressed the accelerator, the road never let us breathe. I could feel something behind the veil of mist, something patient, observing, letting us pass only because it wanted to. Then, suddenly, the fog thinned. A pale light spilled across the road, and for the first time, I saw the sun cresting over the far ridge. Relief should have washed over me, but instead, the emptiness felt heavier than the darkness we had left behind. No laughter, no figures, nothing remained, but the weight of that hollow clung to me, a quiet, invasive chill that refused to lift. The forest on either side looked ordinary, the road mundane, but the sense of eyes watching lingered. Even the birds seemed absent, and the normal sounds of the morning came too late, as if the hollow had delayed the world outside its reach. We didn't speak for the rest of the drive. The van moved through valleys and ridges, but the laughter and whispers followed in my mind. Every time I glanced at Casey or Drew, I saw the same haunted look reflected in their eyes. We tried to tell ourselves it was nerves, a shared hallucination, but I knew better. I could feel the hollow inside me, a subtle tightening in my chest, a shadow crawling just at the edge of vision. Days later, I tried to tell the story to someone who hadn't been there, but the words fell flat. Fog and shadows, they said dismissively. You were spooked, that's all. But anyone who's been through Devil's Hollow knows the difference between fear and recognition. The knowledge that something is out there that isn't human, and that it watches patiently, judging, waiting. I still dream of that road, the fog curling around the tires, the unnatural shadows, the laughter that didn't belong to any living thing. Even now, I avoid that stretch whenever I can, taking longer routes just to skirt its edges. But memory has a way of pulling you back, and the hollow reaches farther than I can drive. Sometimes, at night, I swear I hear the faint echo of that laughter, soft and distant, brushing against the corners of my consciousness. It's never loud, never threatening in a straightforward way. It's just there, reminding me that the hollow remembers, that it waits, and that no matter how far I drive, it follows. You don't come through that place the same, if you come through at all. The forest keeps its secrets, and some of them aren't meant to be understood. The hollow left a mark on me, subtle but permanent, a lingering chill that crawls into my dreams and stays there, patient and unyielding, reminding me that some roads are better left untraveled. We pulled off Route 219 later than we should have, chasing the kind of hunger that only comes after hours on the road with nothing but vending machine snacks and coffee that tasted like burnt wood. The truck stop was deserted, a single flickering light over the entrance giving the whole place the feel of a set piece left behind for some old horror movie. The smell hit me as soon as I stepped out of the van. Wet asphalt, the sour bite of old fuel, and something else I couldn't name, a kind of damp rot, faint and lingering, like it had seeped into the walls decades ago and never left. Casey laughed nervously as he slid the door open, muttering something about how creepy the place looked. Drew said nothing, just kept his hands stuffed into his hoodie pockets, scanning the shadows. I tried to shrug it off, but my chest tightened with a sense of unease I hadn't felt in a long time. That's when I saw him, leaning against the wall near the gas pumps, a brimmed hat pulled low over his face, shoulders relaxed but unnervingly still. He didn't move as we walked past, didn't even glance at the van idling a few feet away. There was no recognition, no curiosity. Just a presence, quiet but insistent. My stomach twisted, a low cold knot forming that I couldn't shake. My friends joked about it, calling him a typical trucker or probably asleep, but the tension in the air was palpable. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights over the pumps seemed to dim under the weight of his stillness. I kept looking at him as I grabbed a soda from the cooler, and my hands shook more than I wanted to admit. The air felt thicker, heavier, as if the night itself had conspired to press down on that little stretch of asphalt. I glanced toward Casey and Drew, but they were distracted, laughing to hide their own unease. I wondered briefly if I was imagining it, but there was something about the way he watched, though his eyes were hidden, that made my skin crawl. We finally finished what we came for, heading back toward the van, and that's when it happened. I swear I didn't blink. One moment he was there, leaning against the wall, watching, and the next, he was gone. No footsteps, no sound, no trace. Just empty concrete, and the lingering smell, faint but insistent, that seemed to follow me inside the van. Casey and Drew noticed my face pale, the way I kept glancing over my shoulder, and asked what was wrong. I shook my head, muttering about nerves and shadows, trying to force the unease back down. But it didn't leave. Not even when the van roared to life, tires crunching gravel, and we merged back onto the road. Hours later, somewhere deep in the twist of Route 219, I caught a movement in the rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was another car, distant, following too carefully, too deliberately. Then I realized it was him. Or at least, something that looked like him. A dark figure, too tall and too still to be a normal person walking, always keeping the same distance, always appearing at the edge of sight when I dared to look. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, but every instinct in my body screamed the same warning I'd ignored at the truck stop. The hair on my arms stood on end, and a cold sweat spread across my back as if the night itself had latched onto me. I glanced at Drew, who had dozed off slightly, unaware, and Casey, whose jaw was tight as he fiddled with the radio. I wanted to tell them to point him out, but every time I tried, he vanished the moment anyone else looked. It was like he existed just beyond the veil of perception, aware, patient, unhurried. We kept driving, the miles stretching and twisting unnaturally, the roads unfamiliar despite my vague memory of the area. Every shadow along the roadside seemed to echo his shape, and even ordinary trees and telephone poles took on the angles and motions of something watching. By the time the first hint of dawn crept over the horizon, I couldn't tell how long we'd been trapped in that highway purgatory. The figure had receded, disappearing once more into the folds of shadow and mist, but the presence remained. It clung to the van, to the tires, to the thin space between my shoulder and the door. The sunlight should have been a relief, but it offered little comfort. The road ahead looked mundane, the towns familiar, but I felt as if a part of that night had stuck to us, a sticky residue of dread that no bright morning could dissolve. 4 days afterward, I couldn't shake it. Every time I turned onto a highway or stopped at a quiet truck stop, my eyes darted to the edges of parking lots and the side of the road, half expecting him to appear, brimmed hat low, silent and still. The memory of him, of the way he could vanish without a sound, of the suffocating weight of the air in that deserted lot, haunted me more than any ghost story I'd ever heard. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps a drifter, perhaps a local playing a prank, or maybe a trick of shadows and fatigue. But deep down I knew better. I knew the Appalachian night was patient, that some corners of the forest and roadside had their own guardians, and that not all watchers are human. Even now, whenever I pass a lonely stretch of road after dark, I catch myself scanning the shadows. I feel it in my chest, a hollow tightening, the echo of that presence that followed us for miles, distant but never leaving. The truck stop, the smell, the silence, it's all embedded in my memory, and I realize that some encounters leave a mark you can't scrub away. You can move on physically, but psychologically, you carry it, a constant awareness that the world isn't as empty as it seems, that there are eyes that watch quietly, patiently, and vanish when you look directly. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I see him in my rearview mirror, a dark shape lingering at the edge of perception, and I feel that same cold knot in my stomach. I don't know if it's him, or if my memory has conjured him from fear, but the feeling is real. It presses on me, reminding me that some roads, some stops, some corners of the mountains are meant to be avoided, or else you leave a part of yourself behind. I've never gone back to that truck stop, and I doubt I ever will. But in the quiet moments, when the highway is empty and the wind carries the faint scent of asphalt and something else I can't name, I remember him, the stranger who was never there and yet always present, and I know that the night keeps its own company, watching, patient, waiting for the next traveler foolish enough to linger. We thought the abandoned Turnpike would be a shortcut, a way to shave off miles and maybe some hours from the drive back home. The road had been closed for decades, locals warned us, but our impatience, or maybe our recklessness, won out. From the moment we turned onto the cracked asphalt, with weeds poking through every seam like the earth itself trying to reclaim what had been taken, I felt the unease settle in my chest. The van's headlights sliced through the darkness, but their beams barely reached past the first bend. Night fell faster than I expected, the kind of sudden, absolute darkness that makes your senses twitch and your instincts scream that something is wrong. Silence pressed against us as we drove. Not just the absence of sound, but a living kind of silence, heavy and thick, as if the forest surrounding the turnpike was holding its breath. Every scrape of a branch in the wind sounded amplified, every rustle of leaves a footstep somewhere nearby. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see some other vehicle, some other traveler foolish enough to be on this road, but there was nothing. Just the curve of asphalt disappearing into shadows and the vague outlines of trees leaning close, their branches like skeletal hands reaching toward the van. Then I saw it, or thought I saw it at first. Something crouched at the edge of the road ahead, too big to be a deer, too still to be human. My heart slammed against my ribs, and I slammed my foot on the brakes, tires squealing against the cracked asphalt. The figure shifted the tiniest fraction, and when I blinked, it was gone. Just empty road, weeds swaying gently in the night air, and that suffocating silence that had only grown thicker as we pressed deeper into the turnpike. Casey muttered something about my imagination. Drew laughed nervously, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. I could feel eyes on us, unseen and patient, and the feeling gnawed at me with every mile we traveled. The road twisted unnaturally, bends sharper than memory suggested, dips and rises that seemed impossible in such a forgotten stretch of pavement. My headlights caught more shadows, flickering at angles that made my stomach drop. At one point, I thought I saw the figure again, crouched behind a patch of overgrown weeds, watching, waiting. I blinked, and nothing. Only the van, our own tense breathing, and that silence pressing in closer, leaving no space to think, to rationalize. The feeling of being watched never left, a low vibration of dread humming beneath the nerves in my teeth. We tried to speak, tried to break the tension with nervous jokes, but every word died before it left our lips. Even the van's engine sounded muted, as if it too was aware of the stillness surrounding us. Time stretched and distorted. I had no sense of how long we had been driving. Every mile seemed longer than the last, every shadow deeper. The turnpike was no ordinary abandoned road. It had its own pulse, a slow, measured patience, like it had been waiting for someone foolish enough to cross its length. Then came the sounds. Faint at first, a snap of a twig, the scrape of something large against the underbrush. I told myself it was animals, maybe a bear, or the wind bending branches in strange ways. But the noises didn't behave like anything natural, jumping ahead of us, appearing behind us, always just at the edge of hearing, teasing, reminding us that the road had company we couldn't see. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, muscles coiled, knuckles white. Drew glanced at me once, and I saw the same fear mirrored in his eyes. Casey refused to look anywhere but straight ahead, muttering prayers I didn't hear. Somewhere in the deepest part of the turnpike, I swear I saw movement along the roadside again, a crouched shape slipping between trees, too fast to be human, too deliberate to be a trick of light. My hand shook, but I forced the van forward, every instinct screaming to stop, to turn back, but I knew we had passed any place of easy escape. The road bent, twisted, and my headlights caught glimpses of eyes, or something like eyes, flickering in the shadows before melting back into the black. The air felt colder, thicker, suffocating, and I realized then that the turnpike wasn't abandoned. It had never been abandoned. It was waiting. When we finally emerged back onto the main highway, the night lifted slightly, and the familiar sounds of cars and distant towns returned. But the sense of being watched didn't leave. It clung to us, a residue that filled the van, pressed against our chests, and lingered in the spaces between words. Even in daylight, when I tried to recount the story, I felt it, like a shadow stretched just beyond the edges of vision, patient, waiting, a reminder that what we had encountered on that forgotten road wasn't entirely gone. I've avoided the turnpike ever since. I take longer routes, daylight drives, places crowded with life and noise. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind carries faint sounds of snapping branches or the distant hoot of an owl, I see it again in my mind's eye, crouched, still, patient, waiting. And I remember, with a chill crawling up my spine, that some roads are never truly empty. They keep their secrets, and they watch patiently for the next traveler foolish enough to think a shortcut can save them. I remember Hollow Creek like it was supposed to be peaceful, picturesque, even, the kind of place postcards are made of, with narrow, winding roads that hugged the banks of a creek so clear you could see the stones shifting beneath the water. But the moment we turned off the main road and followed the creek upstream, there was a tension in the air I couldn't shake. It was subtle at first, a tightness in my chest, the kind that tells you something isn't right even when everything looks ordinary. Casey and Drew laughed nervously, trying to break the quiet with jokes about old ghost stories, but their attempts only made the silence heavier in contrast. The narrow road was flanked by trees that leaned over the creek, their bare branches scratching against each other, making the faintest of creaks that echoed unnaturally in the still air. As we drove, I thought I heard whispers carried on the wind, too faint to understand but persistent enough to make my skin crawl. I leaned forward in the driver's seat, straining to catch the words, but they never resolved into anything concrete. Each time I glanced over at the creek, I could swear the ripples weren't just water. They seemed to move with a purpose, almost as if something beneath the surface was aware of us. Every bend in the road revealed more empty cabins, abandoned and forgotten. The windows were blackened, doors hanging slightly askew on their hinges, swaying gently with the wind, or maybe with something else. My headlights briefly illuminated the interiors. Cracked furniture, sheets of plywood nailed over windows, and the lingering shadow of shapes that my mind tried to rationalize but failed. I could feel eyes on us from somewhere, though every glance revealed nothing. It was like the very air was watching, pressing against our van, holding its breath alongside us. The whispers grew louder when I dared to look at the creek. I'm not proud of how it gripped me, the creeping panic that tightened my hands on the steering wheel, but I couldn't shake it. Drew kept trying to joke about local kids playing pranks, or the wind through the trees, but even he looked pale, his voice strained. I wanted to tell myself he was right, that it was all nerves and imagination, but every instinct told me Hollow Creek was holding something. There was a weight there, invisible but palpable, that pressed on my chest and didn't let go. We drove past more cabins, some barely standing, others just ruins overgrown with vines and moss. Each one seemed to absorb the light from our headlights, turning it into shadows that twisted and moved in the corners of my vision. Once I thought I saw a figure standing in a doorway, just a shape really, before my headlights swept past. I blinked and it was gone. I told myself I had imagined it, that the shadows were playing tricks on my mind, but the dread in my chest wouldn't ease. The creek ran parallel to us the whole way, its waters dark and strangely still at times, rushing at others, almost as if it knew how to pace itself to the rhythm of our anxiety. I could hear the faint lapping against the banks, but beneath it, something else hummed, a sound I couldn't name, something low, almost vocal, buried beneath the ordinary creek noises. I kept glancing over, heart thudding, trying to convince myself it was nothing, but the sense of being observed never left. I thought about stopping, getting out to look, but a deep instinctive part of me knew better. As we approached the next town, the weight of Hollow Creek lingered in my chest. The road widened, the trees thinned, and I could see lights in the distance. Relief should have come with the return to normalcy, but it didn't. There was a residue of fear, subtle but persistent, a feeling that the creek, the abandoned cabins, the whispers, had followed us a little ways, leaving an imprint we couldn't wash away. Casey and Drew seemed unaware, chatting about something trivial, but I sat silently, gripping the wheel, staring straight ahead, feeling that quiet dread gnaw at me even as familiar landmarks returned. Even now, months later, I think about Hollow Creek. I don't dream of it in a traditional way. No screaming, no chases, but sometimes when the wind is just right and I hear the faintest rushing of water in the distance, I swear I hear whispers again. They are so soft you could almost convince yourself it's nothing, until you realize your chest tightens and your hands curl unconsciously, just like they did that night. I've never gone back and I don't intend to. There's a weight there that doesn't belong to the natural world, a tension that waits patiently, embedded in the creek and the abandoned cabins, watching for the next person foolish enough to drive too close to its banks. Hollow Creek taught me that some places aren't meant to be understood, only remembered. That night, in the van, surrounded by the ordinary beauty of the Appalachians, I experienced a kind of quiet terror I can't explain, a presence that is felt rather than seen. And the memory lingers, subtle but unyielding, in the corners of my mind, a reminder that even the most peaceful-seeming places can hold something just beyond perception, waiting for the next traveler to listen too closely to the whispers along the water. I remember the first time I saw Hollow Mountain looming over the valley, dark and unyielding, as if it had been waiting for someone foolish enough to wander its slopes. We were chasing a shortcut, an old service road that wound its way through the ridges, the kind of path locals barely used and warned travelers about in hushed tones. The van rattled over loose gravel and broken asphalt, the headlights cutting thin beams into the surrounding trees, but they barely reached past the first bend. I had the uneasy sense that the mountain was larger than memory allowed, stretching higher, pressing closer with every turn. Casey and Drew were quiet, nerves tight, and the night felt heavier with every mile we drove. The wind picked up as midnight approached, carrying with it sounds that shouldn't have been there. At first, I thought it was just the trees, the way they whispered and groaned under the pressure of the gusts. But then came the low, almost human-like noises, breaths, murmurs, the faintest echoes of footsteps that didn't match our own. I glanced over at Drew, whose hands were tight on his knees, pale and tense, and Casey, staring out the window as if expecting something to step from the shadows. I forced myself to focus on the road, gripping the wheel until my knuckles ached, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Not by an animal, not by another car, but by the mountain itself. Then the lights appeared. At first, small pinpricks in the darkness, hovering above the ridges, moving in ways that no vehicle, no flashlight could replicate. They danced and twisted, splitting apart and rejoining, retreating and advancing, almost as if they were aware of our presence. I slowed the van, heart thudding, trying to make sense of it, but every instinct told me we weren't supposed to see them. Casey whispered, "Maybe someone's up there with a flare," but even he didn't sound convinced. The lights weren't flares. They were deliberate, responsive, guiding us deeper into the mountain's shadowed heart. The road itself began to twist unnaturally, rising and dipping in ways that made the van lurch and my stomach sink. Every turn revealed new shadows at the edge of the headlights. Trees twisted into impossible angles, rocks stacked like they'd been placed by unseen hands, and shapes that darted just beyond clear view. I kept thinking the lights were leading us somewhere, showing us a path, but I couldn't tell if it was a trap or just the mountain's way of testing us. I tried to follow without leaving the road, but every mile felt like hours, and the sounds of the wind, whispers, rustling, faint laughter, grew louder, almost mocking in their subtlety. At one point, I caught a figure slipping between the trees, hunched and moving too fast to be human. My hands tightened on the wheel, heart hammering in my ears. Drew muttered something about going back, and I wanted to agree, wanted to turn around and escape, but the road didn't feel like it would allow it. Each bend seemed to stretch longer than it should, rising and dipping as if the mountain itself was bending reality around us. The lights hovered above, always just ahead, waiting, guiding, and I realized with a sinking chest that we weren't driving toward anything. Hollow Mountain was moving us where it wanted, patient and unhurried. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I lost track of time. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping branch felt like a step, every flicker of light a heartbeat we weren't supposed to hear. My friends grew quieter, their voices swallowed by the mountain and the night. I wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but the words lodged in my throat. The van moved on, tires crunching over the uneven surface, headlights scanning empty road that seemed to stretch endlessly, and the lights responded to us, hovering, advancing, retreating, always aware. Finally, when the first hints of dawn streaked across the horizon, the lights vanished, dissolving into the early morning haze. Relief should have come, but it didn't. The silence of the mountain had settled into me, a heavy weight that pressed against my chest and lingered in my thoughts. The service road opened back onto a familiar route, and the world returned to normal. The trees ordinary, the shadows mundane, but I could feel the memory of the mountain, the lights, the whispering wind, following. It had left a mark, subtle but unyielding, the knowledge that some places are alive in ways we can't see, that the mountain watches and waits, patient and eternal. Even now, months later, I can recall that night with startling clarity. When the wind whistles just right, I hear faint echoes of it, the lights flickering in the corner of vision, the whispering of trees, the sound of steps that vanish when I look directly. I don't think anyone else can understand it, but I know Hollow Mountain claimed a piece of me that night, a memory stitched with fear and wonder that will never fully fade. The mountain waits, always, and though I have no desire to return, I know it's there, patient, alive and aware, holding its secrets for anyone bold, or foolish, enough to drive its ancient, twisting roads.